The week that never existed. She never planned to fall for a man like him. Men like him did not notice women like her, not in ways that lasted, not in ways that mattered. And yet, for one intense, reckless week, the world made a mistake and allowed them to exist in the same space as equals. The first time she saw him, she was invisible. That wasn't a metaphor. It was a skill she had learned the way some people learned languages or music, out of necessity. In places built for the wealthy, invisibility was survival. She moved through polished marble hallways with her head slightly bowed, her uniform pressed flat against her body, her footsteps trained to be quiet. Guests walked past her as if she were part of the architecture. If they noticed her at all, it was only when something went wrong. Five-star hotels were full of rules no one ever explained out loud. Do your job. Don't linger. Don't speak unless spoken to. Don't take up space. She followed all of them. That morning began like every other, before sunrise, before the city had fully woken. She tied her hair back tightly, slipped into the same neutral uniform, and repeated the rule that had carried her through childhood, through foster homes, through every job she'd ever had. If you don't stand out, no one will push you down. Her cart squeaked softly as she rounded a corner on the 7th floor. And that was when she collided with him. The impact was small, barely more than a brush, but it shattered the rhythm of her day. The cart bumped his side. The sound echoed louder in her chest than it should have. "I'm sorry," she said instantly, eyes lowered, voice soft. She expected irritation. A sharp look. Maybe a complaint. Instead there was silence. Not the dismissive kind, the heavy kind. The kind that makes you feel seen before you're ready for it. She felt his attention settle on her, steady and unhurried. When she finally looked up, her breath caught. He was tall, impeccably dressed, the kind of man whose presence bent rooms without effort. His suit fit him like it had been designed for his body alone. His posture was relaxed but certain. Not arrogance, authority. The quiet confidence of someone who had never needed to prove himself. His eyes weren't scanning past her. They were on her. Not assessing her uniform. Not rushing ahead. Studying her. "It's fine," he said, his voice lower than she expected. "Come." Controlled. Almost gentle. She nodded quickly, embarrassed by the heat creeping up her neck, and moved past him. Her heart pounded for reasons she didn't understand and refused to name. It meant nothing, she told herself. A rich man passing through. A moment already disappearing. But that night, something restless followed him back to his suite. He had not planned for her. His life was built on structure. Meetings stacked on meetings, decisions measured in numbers that made headlines. Everything had been arranged for him long before he'd learned to question it. Education. Career. Even marriage. Love, if it could be called that, had always been discussed like a merger. And yet, one accidental collision with a woman in a hotel uniform had unraveled him more than any financial crisis ever had. He sat alone that night, untouched drink on the desk, documents unopened. His mind replayed the moment on the 7th floor, the way she apologized before he could react, the sadness in her eyes that didn't belong to someone so young, the way she moved like she expected to be ignored. People ignored her every day. And he had been one of them his entire life. The realization pressed heavy against his chest. The next day their paths crossed again. Then again. Always brief. Always professional. Always charged with something neither of them acknowledged. He found himself adjusting his schedule without realizing it. She caught herself smoothing her hair in the staff mirror before stepping onto the 7th floor and felt foolish for caring. They spoke only when necessary. Polite words. Careful distance. But something grew in the spaces between those moments. On the 3rd day the elevator stopped between floors. The lights flickered once, then settled into a dull, humming glow. Silence wrapped around them, inescapable. She stood stiffly near the wall, hands folded, breath shallow. "Are you afraid of enclosed spaces?" he asked quietly. She shook her head. "No. I'm just not used to standing this close to people like you." The words escaped before she could stop them. "People like me?" he repeated, not offended. Curious. She glanced up, surprised by the lack of correction. "You're not just a man," she said honestly. A faint smile touched his mouth. "Set. Knowing. Under the suit," he said, "I am." The elevator jolted back to life before either of them could say more. When the doors opened, she stepped out quickly, heart racing, afraid of what might happen if she stayed 1 second longer. Behind her, he watched her go with the unsettling certainty that something irreversible had begun. Asking her to dinner was a mistake. He knew it the moment the words left his mouth. "Have dinner with me," he said quietly, standing too close, his voice stripped of command and filled instead with something dangerously human. She hesitated. She saw the ring on his finger. She knew who he was. Everyone did. A man promised to another woman whose face smiled from magazines. "I can't," she said even as her voice trembled. "I don't belong in your world." He met her gaze. "Then meet me somewhere that belongs to neither of us." That was how the week began. No cameras. No headlines. No rules. A small restaurant far from the city center. Walks through neighborhoods he had never noticed. Conversations that stretched late into the night because neither of them wanted to return to their separate realities. She told him about growing up without parents, about learning early that silence was protection, about dreams she had buried because dreaming was expensive. He listened as if every word mattered. He told her about inheriting a life he never chose, about responsibility that felt like a chain disguised as privilege, about loneliness money had never softened. By the fourth night, restraint hurt. By the fifth, it disappeared. In a quiet apartment hidden from his public life, they crossed the line they had both pretended not to see approaching. The kiss was tentative at first, almost reverent, before it became desperate, as if they were trying to reclaim something they had both been missing for years. For one intense week the world stopped. He was not the millionaire. She was not invisible. They were just two people choosing each other in stolen hours. But reality does not disappear just because you ignore it. On the final morning, sunlight crept through the window as she lay against his chest, listening to his heartbeat. He whispered promises into her hair. He told her to trust him. She wanted to. But deep inside, something old and wounded whispered a warning she had learned too well. People with power leave. People like her are left behind. When he walked out that door, she did not know it yet, but silence was already on its way. And silence was about to change everything. When silence became a decision. Silence never arrives loudly. It doesn't crash in or announce itself. It seeps in quietly, disguising itself as patience first, then confusion, and finally dread. On the first day she told herself he was busy. Men like him were always busy. Meetings ran late. Flights were delayed. Decisions that moved millions didn't pause for emotions. She checked her phone anyway, more out of habit than hope. Nothing. She smiled at herself in the mirror and whispered, "Don't be dramatic." On the second day the smile didn't come as easily. She replayed every moment of that week while folding laundry in her small apartment. Every laugh. Every promise. Every way he had looked at her like she was something rare instead of replaceable. Doubt crept in quietly, the way it always did. Had she said too much? Had she hoped too loudly? She sent a short message. Simple. Careful. Are you okay? It never showed as delivered. By the third day fear had a shape. She stood in the hallway outside her apartment, phone pressed to her ear, heart beating too fast. She had never called his office before. That had always felt like crossing an invisible line. But something in her chest insisted she needed to hear his voice, or at least know he was alive. A woman answered with professional cheer. When she asked for him by name, the tone changed. Cooler. Guarded. "I'm sorry," the assistant said smoothly. "Mr. is unavailable. He does not take personal calls." "I just need to leave a message," she replied, forcing calm into her voice. There was a pause. A brief, loaded silence. "I've been instructed not to forward messages from hotel staff." The words landed like a slap. Hotel staff. Not her name. Not a woman he had spent a week with. Not a person. A category. She hung up without saying goodbye. That night, alone in her apartment, she sat on the edge of her bed and stared at the wall until the room felt too small to breathe in. She finally understood what silence really was. It wasn't absence. It was a choice. He hadn't vanished. He had been sealed off, by assistants, by protocols, by a world that didn't consider her worthy of explanation. The magazine confirmed what her heart already knew. She found it abandoned on a table in the staff room during her break. Glossy pages. Perfect smiles. Headlines celebrating wealth and alliances made of legacy instead of love. There he was. Immaculate. Controlled. His arm around a woman whose elegance matched his public life perfectly. Her smile was practiced. Her posture flawless. The caption spoke of an upcoming wedding. Of powerful families united. Of futures secured. Her hands shook as she folded the magazine closed. The room tilted. She barely made it to the bathroom before she was sick. At first she blamed stress. Lack of sleep. Heartbreak that made breathing feel optional. But when the dizziness didn't stop, when her body felt unfamiliar and fragile, she went to the hospital alone. The nurse's voice was gentle. Almost apologetic. Is there a chance you could be pregnant? The test answered before she could speak. Positive. She sat on the edge of the examination bed, staring at the small piece of plastic like it belonged to someone else's life. A child. A life formed during a week the world had decided never happened. She laughed once. Hollow. Broken. Of course, she whispered. Of course. She tried to contact him one last time. This time, there was no politeness left to protect her dignity. His company rejected her email automatically. His office blocked her number. The hotel manager called her in and spoke carefully, uncomfortably. Instructions have been given, he said. You are not to disturb him again. That was when humiliation hardened into clarity. She understood her place in his world perfectly. She resigned that same day. No farewell. No explanation. She packed everything she owned into 2 suitcases and boarded a bus heading south, chasing anonymity because survival demanded it. Starting over was brutal. Pregnancy didn't soften the world. It sharpened it. She cleaned houses until her back ached. Took delivery shifts late into the night. Saved every coin. Slept less. Ate cheaper. Learned how to disappear in new cities the same way she had learned as a child. But something inside her shifted. She was no longer invisible for survival. She was invisible by choice. She stopped waiting. Stopped hoping. Stopped measuring her worth by who had walked away. When her daughter was born, tiny, fierce, perfect, she felt something rise in her chest she had never known before. Purpose. Holding that child against her heart, she made a vow no one else would ever hear. I will not disappear, she whispered. Not for anyone. Years passed. They weren't gentle years. They weren't inspirational montages. They were long, exhausting, painfully ordinary. Nights studying while a baby slept beside her. Mornings rushing to work with dark circles under her eyes. Days when doubt whispered that she was aiming too high for someone who had started with nothing. Every time that voice returned, she remembered the silence. The blocked calls. The unanswered messages. The doors closed without explanation. And she pushed forward. Slowly. Steadily. She learned systems. Numbers. Logistics. Leadership. She learned how power actually functioned. Not through money but through competence and consistency. She spoke less, listened more, and when she did speak, people paid attention. Respect followed capability. By the time fate decided to circle back, she was no longer the woman he had left behind. She was something else entirely. And somewhere far away, a man who had once believed control equaled peace was learning that wealth could not protect him from regret. The woman he never expected to meet again. Time did not heal her. It forged her. The years after her daughter's birth were not kind, cinematic transformations the world liked to romanticize. They were slow, heavy, relentless. Progress measured in exhaustion rather than applause. She woke before dawn every day not because she wanted to, but because life demanded it. She learned to move through mornings efficiently, feeding a child with one hand while answering emails with the other. She memorized schedules, deadlines, supply chains, and budgets the same way she once memorized silence. Survival had trained her well. At first she took whatever work paid. Then she noticed patterns others ignored. Inefficiencies. Missed opportunities. Systems that could be better if someone bothered to look closely. She didn't speak up immediately. She watched. She learned. She waited. When she finally spoke, it was with solutions, not complaints. That was when people began to listen. Her employer noticed first. Then clients. Then partners. She wasn't loud. She wasn't flashy. She was precise. Reliable. Calm under pressure. The kind of person who fixed problems before anyone realized they existed. Respect followed competence. Promotions followed results. By the time her daughter turned 2, she had moved from executing tasks to designing systems. From assistant to strategist. From invisible labor to indispensable mind. People began asking for her by name. Meetings waited for her input. Decisions paused until she spoke. She never mentioned her past. Never explained where she came from. She didn't need to. Meanwhile, his life looked perfect from the outside. Magazine covers. Charity galas. Global expansions. A wedding praised as a union of power and legacy. Photographs showed him smiling beside a woman who fit seamlessly into his world. Elegant, composed, untouchable. Inside that house, silence lived in every room. They were polite. Civil. Efficient. 2 people bound by contracts rather than affection. Conversations were scheduled. Emotions negotiated away. Nights passed with space between them that no amount of luxury could bridge. At night, he lay awake replaying memories he pretended didn't matter. A small restaurant without cameras. Laughter that came easily. A woman who had seen him without expectation. He searched for her longer than he admitted to anyone. Private investigators. Old records. Dead ends. She had erased herself perfectly. It was almost admirable. Almost devastating. The email arrived on a Tuesday morning. A proposal presentation. A logistics firm shortlisted for a major international contract. One his company had been pursuing aggressively. He skimmed the executive summary absent-mindedly until something made him stop. The structure was elegant. The strategy bold. The efficiency, unsettlingly familiar. He read the name of the lead strategist. His breath caught. It couldn't be. The meeting was scheduled for the following week. He told himself not to expect anything. People shared names. Coincidences happened. Logic insisted he was projecting meaning where there was none. But when she walked into the conference room, the air changed. She was taller somehow. Straighter. Calm in a way that came from knowing exactly who you were. Her clothes were tailored, understated, powerful in their restraint. She didn't hesitate. She didn't scan the room for approval. Her eyes met his. Recognition flickered for half a second. Then vanished. She didn't smile. She didn't falter. She didn't acknowledge history. She began the presentation. Numbers flowed effortlessly. Risks anticipated. Solutions delivered before objections could form. She commanded the room without raising her voice. Executives leaned forward. Pens paused midair. He watched her, stunned. This was not the woman he had left behind. This was someone built from silence, sharpened by survival and anchored by purpose. When the meeting ended, the room buzzed with approval. Contracts were discussed. Next steps planned. She gathered her materials calmly. He stood. "May I have a word?" he asked. She turned, professional, composed. "If it's about the proposal, my assistant can schedule." "It's personal," he said quietly. The room seemed to disappear. She studied him for a moment. Then nodded once. 5 minutes. They stood near the window, city sprawling beneath them. "I looked for you," he said. She didn't react. "You disappeared." "I didn't," she replied evenly. "I was erased." Silence stretched between them, thick and uncomfortable. "I didn't know," he began. She stopped him with a glance. "You chose not to know." His throat tightened. "I was blocked from reaching you." She tilted her head slightly. "Interesting. Because my calls were blocked first." He had no answer for that. "You don't get to explain now," she said calmly. "You don't get closure. You don't get forgiveness." She stepped back. "What you get is professionalism." Then she walked away. He watched her go, understanding something too late. The woman he once believed he could leave behind had outgrown the world that had protected him. And she had done it without asking permission. The truth power couldn't bury. The contract moved forward. That alone should have been enough to keep things clean. Professional. Distant. But power has a way of circling back to unfinished business, and guilt rarely stays quiet when given opportunity. He tried not to watch her. He failed. In meetings, his eyes followed the way she commanded the room with calm authority. No hesitation. No wasted movement. She didn't dominate, she anchored. People trusted her instinctively. The same presence that once made her invisible had been refined into something formidable. He scheduled follow-up meetings under the excuse of logistics. Strategy alignments. Compliance reviews. Necessary steps. She accepted them all. Never alone. Never informal. Never personal. Until the day the truth found him. It was accidental. A photograph slipped from a folder during a review session. He bent to pick it up before she could. A child. Dark eyes. Familiar features. A seriousness in the face that felt unsettling. His heart stuttered. "She's beautiful," he said carefully. Her hand froze mid-reach. "Yes," she replied after a moment. "She is." "How old?" he asked, already knowing the answer in his bones. "For," she said. The room felt too small. Time collapsed inward. His voice came out hoarse. "She would have been conceived." "You don't get to finish that sentence," she said quietly. Silence slammed down between them. "She's yours?" he whispered. "No," she corrected evenly. "She's mine." He sat back stunned. "You should have told me." Her eyes hardened, not with anger but with something far colder. "I tried." He remembered the blocked calls. The assistant's voice. The instructions. "I didn't know," he said again, weaker this time. "You knew enough," she replied. You knew how to disappear. The truth hit him like gravity. Everything he had built. Everything he had controlled. And the one thing that mattered had been sealed off by his own systems. I want to meet her, he said instinctively. She laughed softly, not unkindly but without humor. No. I'm her father. You're a name on a DNA test, she said. That's not the same thing. The following weeks tested them both. He tried lawyers. She anticipated them. He tried leverage. She dismantled it calmly. He tried guilt. She refused to carry it. Every attempt reminded him of a truth he could no longer ignore. She was no longer beneath his power. In fact, she controlled the contract his company needed to survive the next expansion phase. She had become essential. And she never abused it. That restraint unnerved him more than revenge ever could. When the board pressured him to handle the situation, he refused for the first time in his career. I won't interfere, he said flatly. They stared at him like he had spoken another language. He chose integrity over image. For once. Weeks later she invited him to a neutral meeting. Public space. Legal counsel present. Clear boundaries. This is not reconciliation, she said before he could speak. This is structure. She laid out terms calmly. No public acknowledgement. No disruption. Financial responsibility without control. A future possibility, not a promise, earned through consistency. You don't get to be a hero, she said. You get to be accountable. He agreed without negotiation. Because for the first time he understood what power really was. It wasn't money. It wasn't influence. It was the ability to walk away and choose not to. Justice doesn't need revenge. Justice didn't arrive with raised voices or dramatic headlines. It arrived quietly, exactly the way she had learned to move through the world. Months passed. The contract succeeded beyond expectations. Systems she designed stabilized supply chains that had been failing for years. Profits rose. Expansion became possible again. Industry leaders began requesting meetings, not with him but with her. She never mentioned their history. She didn't need to. Her reputation spoke for itself. In private he learned how small his power really was. He showed up when he said he would. Paid what he owed without complaint. Accepted boundaries without argument. He learned her daughter's routines from a distance. What books she liked, what food she refused to eat, how she laughed without restraint. He was present without intruding. And that restraint was his penance. One afternoon, years after the week that never existed, she stood on a stage accepting an award for innovation and leadership. The applause was thunderous. Cameras flashed. People leaned forward, eager to hear her speak. She looked out over the crowd, executives, investors, decision-makers, and felt something settle into place. She had made it. Not by becoming louder. Not by demanding recognition. But by refusing to disappear. In the audience he watched, not as a savior, not as a rescuer, but as a witness. He saw what she had built from silence. After the event she found him waiting outside. Not assuming. Not insisting. I don't regret loving you, she said before he could speak. But I don't need it anymore. He nodded, eyes shining with understanding that came too late to change the past, but not too late to shape the future. Thank you, he said, for not letting me rewrite history. She smiled softly. Justice doesn't need revenge. It needs truth. They parted without bitterness. Without longing. Without lies. She returned home to her daughter, who ran into her arms laughing. The future stretched wide and unwritten, filled with possibility earned the hard way. And somewhere deep inside the world that once erased her, a lesson had been carved permanently. Never confuse silence with weakness. Never mistake invisibility for insignificance. And never underestimate the woman who survives being ignored. Because sometimes the most powerful karma of all is becoming untouchable.